Welcome to Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix. Ladies and gentlemen, mystery seekers, musers, conspiracy theorists, interdimensional philosophers, seekers of truth, comparative mythology enthusiasts, and last but certainly not least, all of you that desperately cling to your confirmation bias. Whether your interest is Atlantis, Zeus, or anything in between, we tackle it all from our quantumly entangled castle tucked away in the ancient flood-battered Central Pangaean mountain range. We're the one-stop shop for mystery, history, and comparative mythology. We're also a podcast dedicated to exploring the ancient, mysterious, and unknown with logic and reason, and where we also theorize the fourth dimension exists and is the spiritual. Only trigger warning for this episode is a logical conversation, so if applying the Socratic method on fringe topics is disturbing to you, you'll want to turn off the podcast now. And we are back, and I've upgraded the entire studio so I can actually play the music live now while I'm bringing the intro in, and man, it really helps, like, just get in the groove of doing M-Quad, you know? How you doing, babe?
I'm good. I'm still mad that you muted me, but it's whatever.
We have to start. So, yeah, I just cutting out extra noise. But yes, psych fact, over to you. What do we have for today?
So we have the serial position effect. So basically, you are more likely to remember the beginning and the end of a list, pretty much. So it's, I'm trying to see what else I wrote here.
Wait, I have a soundboard now. I got something. Wait, no, I think I still have it muted. I'm still learning this.
Oh, so you mute that too?
Yes, I do. There we go.
Oh my gosh, turn that off. So basically, you place important information, to avoid that. So you're basically more inclined to remember the beginning and the end of a list. So to avoid it, you can break information into smaller chunks. You can use space repetition to study items throughout a list. And then rearrange the order of items when reviewing information. So I really wish I knew this in high school and middle school.
Yeah, and then this is why they say to do like a job interview. Like if you can, you want to time it to be either the first person or the last person that gets interviewed. That way you're fresh in the interviewer's mind and you're more likely to get the job and the bias leans your way.
That's true.
Yeah. So no, that makes sense.
Side note, I don't know how true it is, but I've heard that like if you chew a piece of gum while you study, and if you chew that same type of gum when you're taking like a test or whatever you were studying for, you're more likely to remember information that way too, because it's a remembered experience.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, because it's like a sensory correlation with the mental information that you're trying to retain there. So,
pretty much.
Yeah, no, cool stuff. Thank you very much. So housekeeping things before we kick into the episode here real quick. I usually like to do these at the end. We do owe an explanation though, because we just totally missed recording last week's episode.
For a good reason.
Yeah, my laptop just died. It took a dump and just stopped working. Got it back up and running, and we have a whole bunch of new stuff for the studio. I got a new soundboard, which is going to make the audio sound better. I got new mic mounts. A whole bunch of upgrades here to make the studio really nice. I got like nice LEDs that I can change the colors of. So we've been gone for a little bit, but that's okay. We have returned now. It's the first time since the show has started, I think, that we've missed a week. So almost like 2.5 months shy of a year. So like 9.5 months of not missing an episode. I feel like, hey, at this point we've kind of earned to miss an episode if we need. So
it's a pretty good track record.
Yeah. So I actually got some feedback from a listener that didn't like from episode 39 when we were doing a lot of our other mythology analysis. He or she, I don't know if the gender, but they didn't. They didn't like the profile looked like a guy, so but I don't know. Anyway, so they wanted a more systematic like retelling and like organized format. They felt that we were too tangential. So I can support that to a degree. I understand where they're coming from. So we're going to try to do a little bit more of a template like that.
Are you meaning tangential, like we went off topic too many times, or
just kind of like
we just didn't go in
disorganized
order as well?
Like disorganized thoughts, which I mean, to an extent, that's going to happen because
Yeah.
this is musings on mysteries in the mythical matrix. We muse on air, but I am going to try to categorize better, especially for YouTube. I'm going to timestamp everything as best I can to keep it organized for the YouTube listeners with chapters. So you can see when the mythology account starts, and we're going to do mythology, comparative mythology, mythology, comparative mythology, because we're doing 3 today. So just so you know, as listeners, kind of we're shifting gears a little bit to meet that. I'm open to listener feedback. I want listener and viewer feedback.
That's actually really fair.
Yes.
Like, and anything to help people follow along better.
Yes. And not every episode will be like that, though. There are certain episodes that just by the nature of them, they're ramble rants.
Yeah.
Like all of our musing episodes, like if that bothers you, don't listen to our musing episodes. You're not gonna like it. So
no, but that was really fair. Like,
yes.
I actually really appreciate that.
Yeah. So no, it was really helpful feedback. So we're gonna try to adapt to that. If you disagree, or you have other thoughts on ways that we can improve the show here at Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix, email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com or drop a comment on the YouTube video. Give us your feedback, and that way we can, hear what you have to say and see what we can do to kind of adapt our style a little bit to accommodate more listeners. I mean, we're not going to change everything about the show, but I do want to hear back from our listeners and viewers to what they want to see so we can format our material better for you. So I'm going to get off my soapbox here, and so we can start rolling into the actual show itself.
Wouldn't that mean you're still on your soapbox?
Uncalled for. I'm going to mute you again. I'm having way too much fun with the soundboard. And the nice thing is too, is like, it's completely like raw. Like there is like, I'm not doing any edits or cleanups or anything afterwards. So whatever mistakes we make is the mistakes that we make.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, it'll be a good time. So I will also say, there might be some small hiccups here and there with the new soundboard for a couple episodes until I actually get into a groove with this. But just so you're aware, bear with us. I feel like if you've been bearing with us for the last soundboard, then you're probably going to still stick around. So one other thing I'll say, make sure you subscribe for more on YouTube. We just passed 1K subscribers this past week, which was huge. We need a lot more view hours and everything, though, to build up, and likes to build up support for the channel so that YouTube actually starts like paying us out for all the time and effort that I put into making this content and researching this content for you all. So any kind of support you can do, especially on the YouTube channel, is going to be huge. So please do that if you are so inclined. So what we're going to do now is we are going to shift into doing an episode overview. We're going to be talking about Adapa, who is the mortal who rejected immortality in Mesopotamian mythology. And then we are going to talk about Inanna's descent, and she went down to the Underworld and the consequences of what she did there. And then we are going to talk about Etana's ascent, which I feel like ascending up is a good way to end the 3 episodes that we're going over. And we're going to talk about him, and he's the king who sought something in the heavens. So some themes that we're going to hit on is the tug of war between gods and mortals in determining fate. We're going to talk about parallels between Mesopotamian mythology and Christian mythology, as we often do, and then maybe hit on some things like loosely from Greek. We haven't started our deep dive into Greek yet, so I want to hold off on going too far down that rabbit hole. And then going to hit on some vague cultural significance and how these myths evolved over time. So there will also be these sources, once again, legal disclaimer thing here. These sources are compiled from the open domain, and they're summaries of the original texts themselves. But some sources did help me really get a full understanding of these myths for the retelling. The literature of ancient Sumer is one, and Myths of Mesopotamia is another. If you want to purchase those, that is a great place to start if you really want to deep dive into Mesopotamian and Sumerian mythology, because we are not going over every single Mesopotamian Sumerian myth on the show. There's just too much. But yeah, if you want to really do deep dive, highly recommend both those resources. They are an absolute must-have. So we'll shift gears here, and we will do a brief ad break and then come back to transition into talking about Adapa, the mortal who rejected immortality. Stay tuned. And we've returned to talk to you about the oldest documented human figure in Mesopotamian mythology, Adapa, which ironically does sound a little bit like Adam, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
So maybe
Somewhat.
maybe a little parallel to hit there in the future here. Looks like let's see here. I didn't review these notes as much as I probably should have. So he's tied to Enki, the god of wisdom, and connected to the city of Eridu. He's often compared to Adam from the Bible, but it's a good question to ask is he truly the first man, or is he just more of a sage? Because that's kind of what he's referred to in the myth itself. The account is actually found in Egypt, which is interesting, of Adapa, but we'll circle back to this at the end in our comparative analysis. I want to break this down a little bit more. And Adapa is one of the 7 antediluvian sages. He's assigned to bring the arts to mankind, and that's direct from Stephanie Dawley's assessment of it. Highly recommend having her book on hand when you're diving deep into this. She gives a good breakdown before each and every one. But antediluvian just means pre-flood. So like before the flood, which again, we're getting more and more nods to pre-flood. It's a common...
and then deluge, diluvian.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
No,
I agree.
It makes sense, but like not everyone would, make that connection. It's fine.
I didn't make that connection, so very good. Good job. But yeah, so let's jump into the retelling here. So Adapa, he's trained by Enki in the art of wisdom, and Enki is the Sumerian deity of wisdom. He's also known as Ea depending on the translation and the region and time period we're talking about. But one day, Adapa is out and he's on a boat and he's fishing, and a storm comes along, a strong wind, and it overturns his boat, and he gets mad, and what it says is he breaks the wings of the south wind in anger. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. I didn't know wind even has wings, but that's a whole nother tangent in of itself. But he incapacitates the wind. And the sky god, Anu, he sees that this has happened, and he gets really angry at Adapa, and he summons him to the heavens. And Enki hears of this. Then he has to report to Anu, one of the chief deities. And Enki says, hey, they're going to offer you food and drink. It's poison. Like, don't do it. It's going to kill you. And so he gives them some other instructions, and he says, hey, you need to go up and you need to be in mourning when you go up. And he gives them like this little plot. And so Adapa arrives in the heavens. He's summoned, he's called up, and 2 of the gatekeepers see him, and they see that he's mourning, and they're like, who are you grieving? and he says two gods' names, and it's the two deities standing there. And so they burst out in the laughter, and they're like, "All right, you're kind of funny. We'll speak to Anu on your behalf. You know,
You're funny. We'll keep you."
we'll put in a good word for you, funny human." So, yeah, they like his wisdom there that he had learned from Enki. But then, Anu talks to him, hears his side, and he's like, okay, fair enough. And then he's offered food. But what's interesting is that instead of being like the poisonous food, it's the food of eternal life. And it's the drink of eternal life. And Adapa, following Enki's instructions, refuses these items. Mm-hmm. And so he forgoes having eternal life. And he loses out on the opportunity.
So he knew it wasn't poison, and he
didn't know.
Oh, he didn't know. Okay, so
yeah.
He didn't know, and he was still following Enki's instruction.
The myth is kind of vague as to whether he knew or didn't know. It tells the reader that it wasn't poison. It says that it's the food and the drink of eternal life.
Right, but it doesn't say like if he knew or not that it was poison.
Yeah, I don't think it clearly delineates if Adapa knew or didn't know. It was just he was determined to follow what Enki had said, since Enki was his chief deity and he was part of the cult of Enki, if you will.
Okay.
So it's interesting because then you have to ask, well, let's jump into the comparative mythology analysis here, and then we'll ask some questions about that.
Following the template.
Yeah, and what happened. Yeah, I know. I'm trying here. I'm trying random user 123.
1, 2, 3.
That wasn't his name or her name.
I assume that wasn't the name.
Okay. But yes, I mean, we do have some biblical parallels here, of course, with, Adam and Eve, choosing to eat of the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Mm-hmm. And then they, are blocked from being able to eat of the tree of life because of what they've done. And so...
What about the fast in the desert?
What do you mean?
The fast in the desert.
Like Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this was like thousands of years before that. What do you mean?
No, I'm just saying that it's similar to that too.
How so?
Just denying oneself of eating.
I'm confused. Can you explain that a little more?
I'll just wait and go on break and try to collect my thoughts more. But I know what I'm trying to say, but it's whatever.
No, you're fine. My brain is on all this myth stuff, so I'm probably not in. I don't even know. I can't even talk now, so it's clearly not you. It's me. All right, but yes, I know this. This does sound a little bit like Adam and Eve in a sense. It's just a very unique way of telling it. Where there's food involved with the idea of eternal life, like of fruit involved with eternal life. And it's interesting. I don't really know what to make of it. I don't really have too many other thoughts to interject on that specific point. Then there's another way to look at this, and it's to look at it as that Adapa was not the first man, but that he was a Nephilim that was called up to the heavens, and that he was offered eternal life, and that he rejected it. And the Enki, that's from more the perspective that Enki might have been like one of the watchers from Enoch, one of the angels that came down and had children. So that's another way to look at it as well. And then you can also argue that there's a connection to Prometheus here, who gives wisdom to humans and then gets punished for it, and that this could be a connection to that mythology account as well.
In this story, is there anything about temptation like we see in the Bible as well?
No, it's not so much temptation. It's just Adapa, Enki, it uses the same phraseology even to for hey, you're going to be offered this, and it's going to be the food of poison. And then instead, when he gets there, it's the exact same phraseology. It's just, it's the food of eternal life, and it's the drink of eternal life instead of the food and drink of poison or whatever it was. Because again, the exact word choice will vary depending on translation. I'm just guessing off the top of my head on one of them that I read.
Okay. So that isn't something that's in there. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah. So, but then the question becomes is why would Enki deceive him? And so there's a couple of different theories, and I think this is interesting, and I want to play with this a little bit. So theory one is that if Adapa consumed the food of eternal life, that then the gods would get jealous of him and of his wisdom, and maybe Enki was trying to protect Adapa from the gods' jealousy and the dangers there. Theory number two was that maybe Enki was just angry at Adapa for breaking the wing of the south wind and his foolishness there, and wanted to actually just punish him for his foolishness. And then theory number three is that maybe the gods planned to actually poison Adapa, and they actually planned to give him bad things, but they were so entertained and amused by his wisdom that he exercised at the gate and the humor that he brought that they actually changed their mind, and Enki wasn't expecting that despite his wisdom.
Okay, so it could be that either he wanted to deceive Adapa or he unwillingly deceived him.
Yeah, or maybe he was just trying to protect them from the gods getting jealous.
Okay, so it could have gone either way.
Yeah, so it's really hard to delineate because it's such an old account too. So there's a lot of linguistic context that we're missing when looking into stuff like that. So, but it's hard to get down to the bottom of it. But I think it's an interesting question to ask.
I also have a question about the story itself.
Yeah, what's up?
You said that Adapa was... Did you say he was, like, connected to Enki?
Yeah, he served Enki.
Okay.
Why? Did you find something different on fact-checking me?
No, I found that Adapa's the son of Enki, so I'm not sure if that's what that... Now, I'm not sure if the son of Enki, like, a son implies that he works under him or whatever.
Yeah, and I think that might have been because again I was
that could have been a translation thing, but
I
don't know.
Maybe that is a translation thing as well. I have in my notes that he's connected to Enki and then he serves and reports to him, but whether he's a literal son or whether that just means that he's like a high member of Enki's cult or something like that, I don't know with the linguistics.
Think about Christianity. We always say sons and daughters of God.
Right.
It's
not literal.
And brothers and sisters of Christ. Like, it could be that sort of thing too.
Right. And if you're looking at this from a Christian perspective, going really far back into ancient times, maybe that phraseology was used back then too to communicate that idea. And so this is just a bleeding over of that, and that we've kind of had a resurgence of that.
Right.
So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. That's a good one. Good question there. I don't have a solid answer on that, but I think that would just kind of depend on how you want to translate son of Enki. So did you have anything else that you were wanting to hit here? Because we are done with Adapa. Adapa is really short.
That was really quick.
There's not a lot to Adapa, so we'll just probably take another break here unless you have something that you were wanting to hit. But
I think I'm good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we will...
Moving right along.
Yeah. Okay, so next up we're going to hit Inanna's Descent, also known as Ishtar's Descent. I'll explain both of those, and that'll be a little bit more of a beefy retelling and analysis. So stay tuned, and we will be right back. And here we are, ready to descend to the underworld with you and retell one of the older stories of Mesopotamian mythology. We are diving into the descent of Inanna to the underworld. This is a very old myth that dates to around 2100 BCE from the Sumerians and then evolved into Babylonian mythology. I think I want to say 1600 BCE. I don't have that one in my notes in front of me, but around there. It's a journey from power because Inanna is the goddess of love and war, and she has a lot of power. If If you think back to our Gilgamesh episode, we talked about Ishtar. Ishtar is just the Babylonian name for Inanna. So this is the same character that we are talking about here, just to delineate that. But this is the goddess of love that was smitten with Gilgamesh after all of his feats, and then came down and proposed marriage to her, and he laughed in her face.
How rude.
Yeah, well, I mean, she had a reputation for being unkind to some of her lovers, as we'll actually find out in this tale. She has a pretty mean thing she does at the end.
Oh, never mind.
But no, this actually connects to Gilgamesh as well, and I'll be tying this into Gilgamesh as we go, because there are some interesting nuances here that you don't necessarily catch on your first, second, or even third read of this account. It's similar to the Greek myth of Persephone. So the goddess, do you like Percy Jackson stuff? Yeah, like
a little.
Like who descends down and marries Hades, and then that's like the fluctuation of the seasons. This is a similar myth, and there's some indications that potentially this might have influenced, or the Greeks might have copied this one. But we'll dive into that more in the comparative mythology section. I just kind of want to set the stage for what we're talking about here. But yes, this really goes to show the limitations of the Mesopotamian polytheistic deities, and when they're in their specific realms and when they are outside of their specific realms. So it's really unclear as to why Inanna or Ishtar, I'm just going to refer to Inanna because that's the original name, but Ishtar, same thing.
It's the same person.
Yeah. Just like Enki and Ea and all of that. So it's really unclear as to exactly why she wants to descend to the underworld. Whether it's her just wanting to assert power, whether she's actually wanting to go down and grieve the loss of Ereshkigal, the goddess of the underworld's husband, who is the bull of heaven that Gilgamesh and Enkidu slayed. So there's a cool connection right there, that this actually connects, like clicks perfectly with Gilgamesh, and that, this is like a continuation of the saga in a sense, just from a different person's perspective. So maybe she's like, this is a thought I'm having on the fly here. Maybe she's mad at Gilgamesh even, and that he rejected her, and she decides to descend to the underworld as a way to lash out and to be like, I need to reclaim some power and some clout amongst the gods or something. So, because I mean, Enkidu did throw that the leg of the bull of heaven at her, so it's kind of humiliating as a goddess at that point, I think. But did you have something you were wanting to add? It looks like you were wanting to say something.
From what I found, it says that she goes to the underworld to visit her sister.
Yes, that's correct.
Queen of the underworld. So,
yes, Ereshkigal is her sister and the queen of the underworld, yes. Which is, interesting in contrast to Hades, who is a male character that's the ruler of the underworld in Greek mythology. So, so Inanna decides to descend. She, does herself up all pretty, and there's a lot of very interesting nuances in the way that she goes about her clothing attire that is not exactly PG, so I'm just going to leave it ambiguous, and I'll let you, as the readers, if you're interested, you can go check that out if you really want to dive deep into these myths. But she does all this stuff with her. She puts on depending on which one you're reading, it's a crown or a turban. She has a scepter of rule in one of them, and she dons herself in everything that symbolizes her beauty and her power and her ability to fight.
So just a lot of jewels, a lot of...
Yes, like jewelry,
nice
all of that.
Garments, that's not that kind of thing.
Makes herself up pretty and kind of able to kick butt as well. So she shows up to the gate of the underworld, and she demands entrance from the gatekeeper, and Ereshkigal gives permission for her to enter. But here's what Inanna doesn't realize, is that there are seven different gates you have to pass through to descend into the underworld, and in each gate... Inanna is stripped of an element of her power. And so, she loses her jewelry. I think her makeup is one, her clothing, her scepter, her crown, everything. It's all stripped from her. And it's the rights of the underworld to, claim all of your worldly mortal possessions, and that you can't leave life with them. So it's a very cool symbology that we're seeing here. So she passes through the 7 gates, and she's completely stripped of all of her divine power now in the underworld, and faces Ereshkigal, and Ereshkigal decides to kill her. So she strikes her down. Inanna is dead, and then she takes Inanna's body and hangs it on a hook. But I saw your face light up with something. So do you have something you wanted to add in there?
I'm going to wait to the comparative section.
Okay, sounds good.
Sticking to the template.
There we go.
I'm just going to keep saying that.
We're trying. So an interesting thing here is that Inanna actually prepared that this could go wrong. She told her aide, I forget her name. Do you have that in front of you? Because I see you have some notes.
Inanna's aide.
Yeah, she has like a handmaid, if you will. I forget her name. Don't worry about it if it's if you don't have it right in front of you. But she, it's in our breakdown on YouTube. I did have it on there. I'm just blanking on it.
After Inanna's death, her assistant, the god Ninshibur. Is that? Am I getting too ahead of myself, or
maybe? I don't think so. Anyway, I won't worry about
her
it.
Assistant. I don't know.
Assistant, name unknown. You can go watch the YouTube breakdown and laugh at me having a total brain fart on air here. But yeah, she says to her assistant that you are to mourn my death, and then you are to go to different deities, and she gives her a list of deities to go to and ask for aid. And so her assistant does as she asks and mourns for Inanna. But I'm going to stop here for a second because I actually saw something very interesting where they were talking about for mourning, lacerating yourself for the person you're mourning for. And this is an interesting comparison to the Bible, where it talks about, the Bible says don't cut yourselves for the dead, which is interesting because the Bible is delineating that you are not to partake in these kind of pagan polytheistic practices of the area. And so it sheds some light on like the cultural context of the region, which I think is cool. And that verse in the Bible, I think, is Leviticus. So
did you cover trigger warnings? Because you're talking about cutting yourself?
Yeah. Okay. Well, missed that one. Whoops. Sorry. It's fine. It is what it is. But yes, so Inanna's aide goes to all sorts of different deities, and they just basically say, yeah, Inanna's was dumb. She can deal. Too bad. But because Inanna is dead, people are, she's the goddess of love. So love is drying up in the land and fertility is drying up in the land. And Enki sees all of this, and Inanna's aide goes to Enki and asks for help. And he decides he wants to help. So in this version here, and I'll explain this more in the comparative mythology section, he creates two beings from dirt in his fingernails. And he sends them down to Ereshkigal, and they sneak into the underworld. They go through like bugs, basically. Is I think what the similar to phraseology is used. So they go in and they comfort Ereshkigal in her grief, and because they comfort her in her grief, Ereshkigal says, "Hey, I'll give you whatever you want." And they ask for Inanna's body, and they get it, and they try to bring Inanna back up to the underworld. But the demons of the underworld demand that there has to be a replacement for Inanna to ascend back to life. And so she browses around the world for a while, and she sees her own husband, Dumuzi, and I can't really delineate in the text if it's implied or explicitly stated, or if it's just kind of assumed, but it doesn't seem like he's really mourning her the way that he should. And so she kind of gets angry. And so maybe that's the reason she picks him, or maybe it's like she just picked him just because she has a reputation with her lovers. But she picks him to replace her in the underworld, her husband, to take her place, to die. And it really shows the dark side to Inanna, which, again, it's kind of been highlighted a number of times. But Dumuzi's sister sees this choice, and she decides that, no, instead of you just going down and being gone forever, I'm going to, take turns. So you'll do 6 months, I'll do 6 months. And so they trade places, and she opts herself as a substitute. And what's interesting is if you get if you buy the book, The Literature of Ancient Sumer, again, highly recommend if you're wanting to look into all of these. There's another mythology account that follows this one that is called Dumuzi's Dream, and that's Inanna's husband. And it's like his dream of these demons coming for him, and his sister interprets it for him, and then he runs around trying to avoid getting caught by these demons for a while, and then eventually they catch him and drag him off. So it's a really interesting account that kind of adds on to the descent of Ishtar. And then one other thing I will discuss here is that there are other mentions of the underworld spread throughout Mesopotamian mythology. So Gilgamesh actually has a tablet. We didn't really cover so much on our breakdown, but I don't know if it's so much of a tablet, but there is like an extra section to it where it's Gilgamesh and Enkidu actually reunite because Enkidu comes up for a little bit from the underworld. And they talk, and Gilgamesh asks him what it's like down there. And there's a lot of things that are said there, but the gist of one thing that stood out to me was that Enkidu said that if you have, the more sons you have, the more comfortable life you have down here. And they go through this really complex breakdown of like, what is it like if for the one son, the man who has one son, two sons, three sons. But that kind of sheds a lot of light onto the cultural way of looking at all of this, of the value of having, male children. And that was something very common back then. And then the idea of that was to, whether that's like, somewhat of a literal truth that got buried there, or whether it was something put into these myths by somebody to propagate the idea of having more male children. But it was something that inspires and builds off of that, hey, I want to have a male line. Not just for this world, but the next life as well. So that's a really interesting delineation. And then another connection is from Ur Nammu. And so this guy was the guy we talked about in the last episode when my dad was on with the city of Ur. He really rebuilt and revitalized the city. But this is the guy, and he's the one that actually made the oldest law code that we have. It's not Hammurabi. Ur Nammu's law code predates Hammurabi's code. I'm not sure by how much, I think a couple hundred years. But yeah, so we have Ur Nammu, and he also descends to the underworld in his death. And what's interesting is it actually, there's a whole bunch there, but one key thing that stuck out to me is that he descends, and it says at one point that he takes a seat of judgment in the underworld next to Gilgamesh, which is really cool because we know this was a real character from history, at least as far as we're able to delineate. And he's contrasted to Gilgamesh and being equaled to Gilgamesh in a sense. But when he descends, Ur Nammu, he actually brings all of this somehow, and I really couldn't figure out how reading the accounts, but he managed to bring this stuff with him as sacrifices for the deities. Like he brought jewelry, and he like slaughtered a calf in the underworld so that everyone could have a feast. And he's doing all of these things, and so there's obviously a way to enter the underworld and to quote unquote bring things in a sense. And Ur Nammu had figured it out. And it's interesting because Inanna didn't. And she went into the underworld drastically unprepared and kind of ignorant of things. So, yeah, I just wanted to kind of tie all of that in because I thought that was all really interesting. And
I have a question. I'm sorry.
No, you're good. I've been rambling for a while. What's up?
Do you think that it's more her being arrogant or her believing that the conditions would be different for her because of her relation to the goddess of the other underworld, or overestimating people's respect for her power?
Yeah, maybe like, oh, hey, I'm a goddess, so I can bring this stuff down. I don't need to be prepared. No, that could be. Yeah. So no, that's definitely another interesting way to look at it for sure. I would agree with that. But yeah, in the Ur Nammu account as well, there are the 7 gates that are referenced too. So, but yeah, we're in comparative mythology now. So if you have something you want to add to that, go ahead.
I don't know why, but when just the number 7, because think about the 7 deadly sins.
Yeah, no, set numbers of 7 of completion as well. God created in Genesis in 7 days. 7 is a pretty big theme that's followed as like a more divine number depending on the culture you're looking at, of course.
Yeah. And that just popped into my head. That's why my face lit up, because I was like, oh, wait.
Yeah, it is interesting. One other thing I wanted to add into this is that maybe this is why maybe Ur Nammu brought stuff down with him, because it was laid in his tomb. And that's what they were communicating. Because you see that a lot with Egyptians, where they believed that if they're buried with items, they can bring that with them into the underworld. And so maybe this was a precursor, an equal, or an extension of that idea or that thought in some way. And maybe that's how Ur Nammu brought it down, was that when he died, he had all these things buried with him, instead of Inanna, trying to, basically threatening to knock down the gates if they don't let her in, and storming in and having everything stripped from her.
I have kind of a question that could lead into comparative, depending. But it says, after Inanna's death, this is what I read earlier. Maybe I got confused about the order. But after Inanna's death, her assistant, the god Ninshbur.
Yeah, Ninshbur, that is who it was.
Okay. Seeks help from the gods to rescue her. Eventually, Enki, the god of wisdom and water, intervenes, and he creates two sexless beings called Kurgerus.
Yeah, I just left that out because those were too hard to say.
Oh my gosh, lazy. No.
Well, no, those are the two beings I talked about. I just didn't want to
then
confuse all the listeners by throwing all these
all the
names
names.
around. Yeah.
So I wanted to hit like the specifics of two sexless beings, because we also see that in different mythology as well, like Greek, Norse pagan, that kind of a thing, the religion.
Yeah, and what did you?
And I only remembered this because I had to study it for school, for one of my assignments.
Okay.
Comparing, but I wanted to kind of compare with that, because in Greek mythology there's hermaphroditus, and that's actually where we get the word hermaphrodite. It's not entirely sexless, but that's where hermaphroditus actually has both male and female parts.
Yeah, okay.
And then, like, if we see Norse mythology, Loki, like he can, you know what I'm going to say.
Loki, yes, he's not a sexless being, though.
But he can
he's
change.
like
He shapeshifts.
He's a shapeshifter that's like all over the place, and bestiality, and we'll leave it at that.
We're not going to get into that.
This is didn't put that in the trigger warnings either.
Oh well. I also saw something, I don't know how to pronounce this one, but Aether, personification of the upper sky, and then chaos, like just personification of nothingness. And this is Greek.
But yeah, there's a lot of different.
But they aren't represented as having clear genders either. So I don't know. I just thought it was interesting that it's not just this, myth.
Yeah, that is definitely an interesting point to keep in mind, too, as we continue to dive into all this mythology, is where else we do see sexless beings. But something I actually want to hit on here, and you've kind of segued me perfectly into my last point or so for this, for Inanna's descent. We actually have the two different versions of Inanna's descent and Ishtar's descent. They differ by several hundred years, and across different cultures. They actually vary immensely in detail. So, for example, you have the two sexless beings that are created here, but what you have with Ishtar's descent is Enki actually creates this being called good looks, is what's defined in Stephanie Dolly's translation. So like a handsome being. And he goes down to, the implication is try to seduce Ereshkigal instead of comforting her in her grief by listening to her laments and talking with her. And that instead of like listening to this handsome being, Ereshkigal actually curses him. And then for some reason decides, I'm just going to get Ishtar out of here. But that's not what we see when we look at Inanna's descent. It's the two beings that go down, and that they actually comfort her and they succeed. And now there's a number of different things, like Inanna is described as having, I think, a turban, and then Ishtar is described as wearing a crown. And again, this could be a translation nuance because I cannot read cuneiform. So this could just be, a simple thing. But like,
I mean, if you want to get into the symbology of just wearing something on your head to represent status.
Yeah.
I mean, but I'm curious about the difference between Inanna and Ishtar with the creating
I am too.
either sexless beings or the handsome the handsome guy.
Yeah, and then so then the question becomes: did Enki do both? And the handsome man failed, and then so he created the beings, the flutter, to go down and to talk to Ereshkigal and try to comfort her. Was that what it was, or do these where are the differences here? Why is it so different?
I mean, or is it kind of like the Grimm? What is it? The Grimm brothers and the Disney stories or whatever.
Yeah, it changes.
Like if you think about Rapunzel in the original story versus the Disney version.
So this circles back perfectly, and we're gonna do a video on this on the channel soon. But this circles back perfectly to a major debunk on the infamous Billy Carson.
Oh my gosh!
Yeah, we're still on that here. We're still on Mesopotamian mythology. It fits.
Yes.
But these myths, and this is not unique amongst Mesopotamian mythology. Gilgamesh, depending on the time period, actually ends at different points as well. Like the story ends. So we have precedent for this across a lot of Mesopotamian myths, but they actually change depending on the specific region and the specific time period. There is not a strict preservation of these stories that you see, where there's evolution and there's change and there's different details added or subtracted from it, or things are different.
Mm-hmm.
But what's interesting here is we contrast this to the Bible, and as far back as we have, with the Dead Sea Scrolls going back almost 2,000 years, contrasting to just a couple hundred years, is we have minimal textual variance. With the Dead Sea Scrolls, where it's like the small 1% of variance exists is just like simple syntax errors or spelling errors or something like that. It's nothing that actually changes, like maybe a slight different word order, but nothing that changes the actual core meaning of the text itself.
Like we have different versions of the Bible.
Well, different translations, but but the original documents that we have are all similar. Like they are all infinitesimally similar. Like there's no major discrepancy or difference amongst the texts, versus like you look at this here, how Inanna leaves the underworld or Ishtar leaves the underworld. It's two totally different accounts. So, and we're like there's no clear way to synergize them. The clearest way to look at this is that, hey, these two accounts, like one evolved from the other. And I mean, you could maybe try to argue from a different eyewitness perspective or something here, but I mean, it's still the same tale. That kind of explanation doesn't really fit here the same way it would for like the Gospels that we see in the New Testament. So it's a big challenge in the face of saying that these older texts are more reliable than the Bible is, because they don't withstand historical texts of like historical tests of staying the same over time. So I think it's important to acknowledge those limitations. Do you have any other thoughts?
No.
All right. Well, then that being said, we are going to talk about Etana next. He's the king that sought to enter the heavens, and that's probably my favorite of the three. So if you've made it this far, please stick around, because we'll have a good time with this one, I think.
This is...
Soaring with the eagles here, musings on mysteries in the mythical matrix, attempting to ascend to the heavens to claim divine favor. that's what we're going to be talking about here with Etana. So, all right.
I love every single time you bring us back. You sound so fancy with all your eloquent words. Like it's just so nice.
Yeah, and then I like stumble over my sentence,
And
like,
like
5 things later. Yeah,
brain fart.
Yeah,
No, I'm just picking on you.
I'm having a major brain fart here. But yeah, all right. So Etana is the king of Kish. So we'll do again, same format, introduction. Kind of give you a little bit of quick background here. We're going to retell the myth. Then we're going to do comparative mythology analysis. And then I have another big thing I'm wanting to hit, but we may bleed that into the next episode because this is starting to run a little long. So yeah, we'll see how this goes. So Etana is the king of Kish. He's a post-Diluvian king, so that may not be quite the See, there we go. Stumbling over words after that eloquent intro.
It's normal. It's human. You're human. Just keep going.
He ruled after the flood. All right. So he's king of Kish, but he didn't have an heir. He didn't have a son to pass on his lineage to. And so Shamash leads him to this fallen being to try to solve his problem. So Shamash is the sun deity in Mesopotamian mythology, and he is often correlated with justice, which is going to be a key theme to fixate on. And I think Shamash is the same one that helps Enkidu and Gilgamesh with slaying the Humbaba, I think. So
do you want me to?
No, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I'm like 95% sure, but I just don't want to say it and then do a Billy Carson and like just be wrong.
No, it'd be doing a Billy Carson if you wouldn't admit that you're wrong.
Yeah, that's fair. Okay.
It's okay to be wrong. You just have to be willing to admit that you're wrong sometimes.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we'll start this story here off. It starts with the story of the eagle itself, actually. And I don't think the eagle is named in this mythology account, but it just refers to it as like the eagle. But so the eagle has a serpent that it sees, and it proposes that it and the serpent should be friends. And the serpent looks at it, and it's like, you've done all these evil things. You're a really horrific being. Like, what? I don't want to have a relationship with you. But the eagle, talks with him a little bit, and they decide to swear an oath before Shamash. Basically saying that like if either of us breaks this pact of friendship, that Shamash is going to deal with us harshly. Like Shamash himself will judge us, which is definitely something that you should be careful of. Looking at various different accounts is invoking a deity's name and then breaking that. There's almost always like hell to pay.
Backlash.
Yes, there's always a lot of backlash for that. At least as far as these tales go. And I mean, we even see that today a little bit in honoring like swearing an oath in court, like that there's like a consequence to that. Cause you're like, if you're atheist, it's a little different, but like you're generally speaking, you're swearing on like the Bible, to tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. So help you God. So
wait, so if you're in court, do atheists like have to swear on the Bible?
That's a good question. We need to stay on topic here. We're gonna get yelled at for going on tangents.
Sorry, user 123. Please continue.
But yeah, so they build a good friendship. Actually, they feed each other's young. The eagle will catch like something, and it'll give the serpent's young some of the food, and the serpent will catch something and give some of the eagle's young some of that food. And so they build this good symbiotic relationship. But one day, and again, it's not really explained why, but the eagle decides, you know what, I don't like the serpent's young anymore. I'm going to eat them. And one of the eagle's offspring is like, Father, don't do this thing. You've sworn an oath with Shamash, in front of Shamash, and he will deal with you. If you break that, please don't do this. And the eagle ignores, the threat of Shamash's looming judgment, and he does it anyway. And he eats all of the serpent's young. Very, very horrific act to do. So we see the serpent was warranted in his apprehension of trusting the eagle. So the serpent comes back and sees its nest empty and cries out to Shamash for justice. And so Shamash speaks to the serpent and he says, hey, you're going to go kill this one beast of the field, and you're going to go inside of it, and you're going to wait in like the deepest like morsels for the eagle to come and eat. And then you're going to spring out and you can have your justice. And so The serpent goes out and does this. It hides inside this beast that it's killed, and all these other animals start coming, gathering around and eating from it. And the eagle sees it, and he's like, "Hey, you know what? I want to go down there, and I'm gonna barge in, and I'm gonna demand some of the food." And one of the eagle's young again says, "Father, don't go down there. What if the serpent is laying in wait for you?" And the eagle is like, "But look down there, like there's animals down there eating already, so it's fine." So he goes down and he picks through some of the finest morsels and goes deeper inside of the I'm trying not to get gory here, but he goes deeper and he's eating. He goes deeper inside the beast to eat than anything else did. And then the serpent jumps out and breaks his wings and casts the eagle into a pit. And the eagle tries to like barter with him and it's like, "Hey, I'll do whatever you want, kind of a thing, and I'll give you this and that." And the serpent's like, "Shamash has appointed me to do judgment upon you. If I don't deal with you, Shamash will deal with me." So and on top of that, it's like you ate its children too. So like
Fair.
yeah, like you ain't really gonna barter your way out of that one at that point. So that's kind of the first part of Etana here, which is really interesting. And then the scene changes. We jump over to Etana, who is the king of Kish, and he's praying to Shamash, the sun god, and he's asking to have an heir. And Shamash leads him to this pit that the eagle was cast into. And so Etana is faced, like he talks with the eagle, and Etana is faced with a choice. Do I trust this eagle to help me? Because the eagle offers like, "Hey, I'll help you look like," because let me back up. Etana is looking for what's called the plant of birth. It's like a very specific plant that's supposed to be able to give him an heir. And so the eagle's like, "Hey, I'll fly every mountain for you, but please help me. Like I will help you find this thing." And so Etana, he decides to help the eagle, and he nurses the eagle back to health. He trains the eagle how to fly again. Very much, it stays in the pit the whole time because he can't get it out. But it's very much How to Train Your Dragon vibes, kind of in a sense, like with Toothless. It really is very much like that.
Yeah.
So maybe they got their inspiration from this even. I don't know.
That'd be pretty cool.
Because you do see a lot of timeless myths get retold and they get very popular, which I think is an interesting theme. But yeah, so something like that. But the eagle, once it can fly again, it flies in search over like all the mountains in the area, and it comes back to Etana and he's like, "I'm sorry, but it cannot be found. But how about this? Because you and I, we've made a bond. Like I want to do this favor for you. How about we ascend to the heavens themselves and enter the heavens and claim the plant of birth?" And Etana's like, "All right, might as well, right? At this point, because he's desperate for an heir." So the eagle's very big at this point. And this is where it becomes very clear, because Etana actually climbs onto the eagle's back and they fly towards the heavens. And it gets interesting to delineate because it's not really clear if they actually like transcend into space or if they transcend into the spiritual realm, but because that's a huge semantics issue when you're reading the text where they talk about like the earth not really being visible anymore. And it's like, what do they mean by that? Do they just mean like the visible ground? Do they mean like you literally can't see it anymore because they've left Earth in terms of space travel? Or does it meant in terms of like transcending into a spiritual realm? And so you're faced with all of these questions of like transcending the different levels of heaven, like how we have like first, second, third heaven in some like kind of more vague maybe occult belief systems, and even in some Christian belief systems there's different tiers to heaven. So it's not really exactly clear, but Etana and the eagle ascend, and at a certain point, Etana looks down and fear overtakes him, and he's like, "We have to go back. I can't do this." Like he's it's a natural human thing to be scared of heights, and so the eagle, drops back down to earth with Etana, and Etana is faced with his failure, and he has a dream, and in this dream, he goes into the heavens and he sees the plant of birth. And that he there's this whole thing where like there's all these gods there that he interacts with, I think, in his dream. And he wakes up and he tells his wife and the eagle, and his wife also had a similar dream that she tells, and the eagle translates these dreams, and he's like, "You are, this is it. Like you went to you're supposed to go to the heavens. Like, this is the gods telling you, you're supposed to be there. You're supposed to do this thing. So let's do it again. And Etana, agrees, and he gets on the eagle's back, and they go towards the heavens, and they enter the heavens, and he receives the plant of birth. Or do they? Because not all versions of the myth agree. Some say that he succeeds, and some say that he fails, or at the very least it cuts off and doesn't give us the full story. So it's an unclear ending as to whether he actually even succeeds in his quest or not. Thoughts?
I have more thoughts on symbolism than anything, but I think it's really interesting too to leave. It is left on a cliffhanger, right? It's not like stuff is lost and the ending isn't discovered. It's that it's intentionally left that way.
Or is it? Because there's something I still haven't told you.
Oh, okay.
So we go and we look at the Sumerian king list. And the Sumerian king list mentions Etana as king of Kish, as he is described. And it says that, and I got this from livius.org, looking at their Sumerian Kings List translation, but it says that Etana is succeeded by Bali, his son.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an indication that Etana is actually succeeded here in a different story, in a different document.
That's kind of cool to make that connection, though.
Yeah. So, and I also looked at like some of the other Sumerian kings as well that are listed, and not all of them are described that way. So I have to give some context here. In Mesopotamian mythology, it wasn't always about bloodline. It was about divine choice, divine favor. The gods had to pick the next ruler. It wasn't automatically guaranteed that just because you were the son of the king and the firstborn, you would be the next king. It didn't work that way all the time. And so that kind of emphasizes Etana's desperation here a little bit, was to seek out this heir that would get the divine favor of the gods. And it looks like from the Sumerian king list that he did indeed succeed in his quest, because not every Sumerian king that succeeds is described as being the son of the previous one. In fact, I think like one or two kings down from Bali, it literally says, then so-and-so took over, and then so-and-so took over. But it emphasizes with like Etana and Bali that, then Bali, his son, took over. So
it's interesting because they purposely put that in there to indicate that.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you?
Why wouldn't you what? Like
for the other ones,
Like the other endings, you mean?
No, the other kings on the list.
Oh, yeah. Okay, I'm tracking with you now.
Yeah.
Okay. But yeah, so then we're faced with one more question too, because we're not really told that Etana ever returns, which is interesting as well, because was this just the end of his reign then, and that for Bali to take over, he had to stay in the heavens? Because it's not said, at least in the versions that I've read. And then, it's not really delineated when Bali takes over as well. Oh, and in the Sumerian king list, because this is a way we can be sure that we're talking about the same person, it says Etana, it says Kish, and it says Etana ascended to the heavens. So we definitely know for sure that we're talking about the same person here. So, but yeah, now let's jump into comparative mythology, because I'll let you kind of spearhead this off, because first thing I have is on some spiritual symbolism.
So the biggest thing that I thought about was the irony and the meaning, like the symbolism behind the animal choice of snake and eagle. So if we look in the Bible, snake is, the devil. But the irony in this story, is that the snake isn't the one who betrays. It's the eagle. And if we think about the symbolism of eagle, I mean, the United States bald eagle, the symbolism there is it could be interpreted as a sign of like freedom or independence. And I think that's cool too, the irony of that, that it's a sign of freedom and independence, but he's left in a pit and he can't leave the pit. So he's not free.
Yeah, no, I agree with it. It's a very interesting. I was actually kind of taken aback when I read this because it's a very interesting flip of roles, where the serpent is actually made out to be the good guy and the eagle is actually made out to be the bad guy.
Hmm.
Because eagles are routinely portrayed, at least in modern society, as being these robust, trustworthy, reliable, wise beings. And here it does an incredibly foolish, evil thing, and it has a reputation for doing this. And then it receives an incredibly harsh judgment. And we see a serpent, which is delineated in the Bible as being something that's like evil, that does something very just, very good, and has like good discernment to not trust this being.
Do you think that the difference in the symbolism behind the animals is just a cultural thing? Or do you
Could
think
be.
that they did that on purpose?
Now, that's a good question, and I don't know that. Um, Yeah, because then we get into other stuff when we start looking at like Anzu, which we're going to talk about in the next episode, which it's like it's sometimes translated as like thunderbird or like an eagle or a griffin or sometimes even a dragon. So I mean the understanding here of eagle, I don't know what specific word is used in the cuneiform again because I don't speak cuneiform, but we do also have to read cuneiform. But we also have to understand that like this may be an eagle, this may be a right translation, or maybe we've misunderstood this aspect and it's not an eagle, but maybe like a pterosaur or some other flying creature or something.
Or just a large bird?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, like some other large bird, or like maybe even a dragon. Like
Yeah.
we have to keep all possibilities in mind, whether this actually happened or whether it's just 100% mythology. We have to keep in mind that there could be nuances in how we're translating this as well. So I'm not saying that to discount it was an eagle. I don't know enough about the original language to intelligently comment on that, so I won't. I just want to propose that idea so that our listeners can think about that in a deeper light. I also think it's interesting that though, like and this is an argument for the eagle being a correct translation, but that ascending to the heavens, the eagles are one of the highest flying. They're not the highest, but they're one of the highest flying birds that exist, and they're often understood in pop culture and society to be the highest flying bird. But they fly like I think up to like 10,000 feet or something sometimes. So they fly like incredibly high, and so an eagle for this choice would make sense, and it is a good way to think about this and understand everything here. Another thing I'm going to propose here is that maybe Etana wasn't seeking what we thought he was seeking. It's possible he was actually legitimately seeking an heir to be able to have a child, have a son. But maybe he wasn't seeking out a son. Maybe he already had Bali, but he was seeking out the divine choice for Bali. Does that make sense? Like he was seeking out, because like it's not guaranteed that you pass down your bloodline. So maybe to guarantee Bali's success in lineage, he had to ascend to the heavens to make a point to the gods. And maybe the gods even kept him in the heavens because of that.
I mean, that's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's right. I just want to again. I just want
That's why I said idea.
Yeah, I just want to put that out there again as a different way to think about this. That like hey, we're not bound to those limitations of literal biological son because it passes through lineage. Maybe he was just wanting that divine approval for his son that already existed, so he could be an heir for the kingdom he had worked so hard to build, and that he was desperate to pass it on to his son. And so maybe it wasn't so much for the unborn son, but because he loved his actual son so much, he wanted that for him. And then maybe, again, maybe he even stayed in the heavens for that. And so, but yeah. Do you think this maybe reflects like some kind of hidden message into Mesopotamian thought about fate versus free will?
Probably.
Because, I mean, you have the choice of Etana to ascend, and then he gets scared and he goes back down, and then the gods reveal his destiny in a dream, and then he ascends again and fulfills, or at least in some versions, fulfills his destiny. So, I mean, we're faced with... It's an interesting way to think about everything. Like, what would have happened if the gods hadn't given him a dream? Would that have been like how does this element of free will and fate play together here? It seems kind of Christian, I think, almost in a sense, in terms of the way I would think about this from a Christian perspective. That like, fate versus like free will and prophecy is kind of like all playing together in a way that I would similarly define it as a Christian. But
I mean, if you think about it, I don't know if it was so much self-doubt, but definitely fear. You said it was what? Fear of heights?
Yeah, basically he looked down and he got scared because he couldn't see like
Okay.
the ground anymore.
Okay. I mean, if we think about like just emotions in general, it's a very human thing. So
Yeah, I agree. Is there anything else that you're specifically wanting to add to this discussion here? I have one more point I want to hit, and then we'll switch over to different gear.
nope, you are okay.
All right. So one other thing I want to hit on too is that I want to think about this in terms of a number of different myths. There's Ganymede, which is a Greek myth of someone that ascends on, I think it's also like an eagle or a bird or something. And that's a very similar myth to this. In fact, there's some belief that was copied from this, or that they come from like the same proto-myth. But then we also have the tale of Icarus, which we're more familiar with on this show because we've already talked about it some. And then we also have the tales of Enoch, who ascends to the heavens and then walks with God and does not return. And so you've got to wonder how all of these different stories of people ascending to the heavens, like, are these talking about the same person? Are they talking about different people? Have there been multiple people that have ascended to the heavens? You know, is this just pure mythology? Is this maybe something that we've missed about symbolism of spirituality and being able to actually enter the heavens if we are so chosen and have the tools like an eagle to enter the heavens? Like, these are all questions that, you know, we don't really think about from our naturalistic scientific worldview, where we're just confined to the 3 dimensions. And here at MQuad, we try to expand that out to the 4 dimensions to think about this 4-dimensionally. What if the spiritual exists? What if it's the 4th dimension? What if there's certain 4th dimensional beings that interact in our 3-dimensional world that we can interact with, and that then could even take us to these locations? So I don't have the answers to this, but I just want to kick it out there. Email us at m.quad.musings if you have any thoughts that you want to add to that. So I don't really think I have anything else at the moment here to discuss. We're running a little long, hour and 12. I feel like if I go on my last rant, we're going to be like in an hour and 45. So I'm probably going to opt not for that. We'll bump that to another episode. But I do want to talk about how myths get... So I'll say what it is, and then we'll talk about it in an upcoming episode. I want to talk about how this account of Adapa and some fragments of Gilgamesh actually were found in Egypt at Tel El Armana in relation to how these myths get dispersed and potentially copied, the way that Billy Carson likes to put forward. So I do want to tie all of that in, but that'll be a future episode at this rate. So at this point here, we're going to kind of do a quick recap of these 3 myths after we come back from this break, and then some final comparative insights to leave you with, some housekeeping items, and then closeouts. So stay tuned. We will be right back. The question on every muser's mind here is, were we left in the heavens, or did we return to our air? Here on Musings on Mysteries and the Mythical Matrix, we are here to explore these ancient myths and ask the questions that no one else wants to ask, apparently. We hope you do, though, as listeners. So please email us at m.quad.musings@gmail.com if you have anything to add, if there's anything you think we missed. Just let us know. Give us some good critiques here. So we're going to hit the The recap here. You had something you wanted to say about Etana, though, first, before I run into that.
The eagle.
Yeah.
So I also came across that the eagle could also represent resilience. And that was actually what we were like just talking about with, what is it? Like the fear, and pushing past that.
Yeah, and I mean, you see the eagle itself has resilience where it like learns from its betrayal and it doesn't betray Etana when they ascend to the heavens. It has some loyalty now finally, and it adapts after, being cast into a pit by Shamash. Well, the serpent via Shamash's command.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had Adapa. We talked about the man that was deceived possibly out of immortality, whether it was intentional by Enki or whether it was some other mix up. And then we broke down some comparisons to Adam, the Nephilim, asked some questions about that in relation to the Watchers. Then we talked about Inanna's descent into the Underworld and everything that she faced there, her arrogance, if you will, to ascend and be able to retain her power, and that she didn't. She died. It affected the external world, and that then Enki, the god of wisdom, intervenes and rescues her, and then she chooses her husband Dumuzi to enter the underworld. And then finally we hit on Etana, who is desperate to find an heir, and he seeks the heavens, and he rides an eagle that has been cast down and that has a bad reputation. And despite this being's evilness, it's still able to ascend into the heavens and have some redemptive qualities to itself, which I think is interesting. And then we've hit various comparative mythology themes, hitting some Greek comparative mythology, some biblical comparative mythology aspects, and kind of asked some thought-provoking questions on the way that these mythology accounts have been read, such as what was Etana really seeking, and what is Inanna's descent combined with Ur Nammu and Gilgamesh's account of Enkidu from the underworld. What does all of this, in a big sense, tell us about the underworld? Yeah, and then the last one as well with going backwards with Adapa, the wind having wings. That's another interesting one to think about and to try to quantify as well. So that's just kind of a recap of everything that we went over there. So we'll hit some other comparative mythology insights here. We see that the mortals and gods are in a constant kind of conflict, if you will, over fate and divine power, where there's this tug and pull where sometimes the gods are wanting to help out and sometimes the gods are just uninterested. There's a lot of specific personality traits that are being expressed depending on the deity we're looking at. A big question is, are these all allegories, or do they reflect like real things that happened in some capacity? Like, where is the line? Because I threw that comment in there with Etana, like ascending into space. Was the eagle something that was maybe more equated to like getting Zachariah Sitchin, Billy Carson-esque here, a spaceship? I don't know if I believe that, but we have to ask the questions. I think it's our intellectual honesty and duty to do so. But there's just a lot of questions we have to think about, and I don't think we can get to the bottom of that. Honestly, I think that's just a very, very subjective, personal belief conclusion you have to come to. But if you have stuff to add, email us into the show and let us know. Maybe we'll read your thoughts in your email on the air here. Are there parallels to the Bible here? I don't see a lot of parallels. We hit some kind of vague themes like Enoch and Etana, but how does this connect to the Bible? Are these accounts that we're going over today, are these maybe just distortions of earlier truths and like a proto mythology that existed in a wider template? Next episode, we're going to be going over the I actually happened upon this one in all my studies, but the Mesopotamian, it seems like the story of Satan in a way that's not told in the Bible. And so then that begs the question, how do all these things fit together in a bigger picture, which I think is pretty mind-blowing. But yeah, I think you and I are both of a mindset that these are all like kind of an Ur myth or a proto-mythology, that there's an original true account that supersedes everything, and that a lot of these are kind of like twisted and mythologized. I apologize. Accounts that have been like distorted over time just by the natural retellings of them over and over again. But that I think that most, if not all of these do trace back to some kernel of truth or not.
Or they never happened at all, and it's just a poetic way to tell a story.
And that is another thing too. And I think that with mythology, we probably do have a blend of both, where we do have some things that probably just didn't happen, and it's a creative way to tell a story. Like with Gilgamesh's seeing Enki from the Underworld, there's a clear motif there of, hey, have sons. That's a clear political like motif. Now, was that something that actually happened? Maybe, if you want to get really spiritual. But is it more likely that maybe someone came along and added that afterwards, since it's kind of more of a forgotten tablet to be like, hey, we need more fighting men for our wars, so we need to tell people to have sons so they have a better life in the underworld. It's a good way to motivate people.
That's such an extra way to push propaganda.
But like the Vikings, they had the belief with Norse pagan that, if you die in combat, you go to Valhalla. Yeah. And it's, again, that's a way to promote this this security in your life, in what you're doing for a specific end, for an end of whoever is telling these stories. So I think it's important to keep those extra motifs in mind as well. So yeah, send us your thoughts to m.quad.musings@gmail.com. Do you think that these myths are just stories, or do they reveal something deeper about the spiritual realm? We really, really would love to hear from you on that one. Also check out the YouTube channel. I'm going to do an Adapa. I haven't gotten around to that one yet with my computer being down. I did a retelling of Inanna's descent with cutting edge AI visuals. Almost looks like a Hollywood movie to a degree. And then same thing with Etana. It took a lot of prompting and finessing with the AI engine, but I did get a very high quality depiction of Etana on the actual eagle itself for a couple scenes. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff and you want to help conceptualize these myths a little further, go check them out on the YouTube channel. They're all available in our Ancient Myths Retold in Under 10 Minutes or Less series. We also have Gilgamesh, Enuma Elish, and I think there's another one or two in there somewhere. But yes, the next episode we are going to be hitting a breakdown of the story of Anzu, who I think is the Mesopotamian version of Satan. Man, I'm doing so good, and then I just butchered it again, so it's fine. But yeah, so stay tuned. Definitely come back for the next episode. Anything else that you want to add in for our listeners?
Stay tuned to talk about state.
All right. On that note there, hit some final closeouts here. Please take some time to share the podcast with someone in person. We're kind of to the point where we definitely need some more listeners and support. We're building some good momentum on YouTube, but a lot of people will find the podcast by someone else recommending it to them. So if you have someone that in mind that might enjoy the show, please recommend it to them so that we can try to garner another listener. Buy us a cup of coffee link is going to be in the show notes. I'm going to do a new thing here as well. If you do a $25 donation or more, you're going to get mentioned as a producer for whatever show is close. It comes next after your donation. And that might vary a little bit depending on when I see the donations, of course. You can find us on Instagram, TikTok, m.quad.musings, YouTube as well, Facebook, Musings on Mysteries in the Mythical Matrix. And we invite you once again, email us at m.quad.musings. Let us know if you're another thing too, let us know if you're liking the show. Like if you're liking the way that we do it, like our format. Like if you want it to stay the same, let us know so that we don't change it. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, be user 3, 2, 1 and be like, no, I think everything's great. I love the tangents. Let's throw a cog on the wheel here. I'll get a good laugh. I'll read it on the show. I will. But yeah, so whether you've been listening on the earth, above the earth, or below the earth, down in the depths of
Sheol,
we thank you for tuning in and quantumly transcending time with us to interact and muse with us this fine evening. We really want to hear your confessions, concessions, contentions, and your snide remarks. So have a good rest of your evening and don't descend to the underworld.
Bye.